Life everywhere is changing, and Kansas communities are no exception. Familiar models are being re-examined, and questions that once seemed settled are now wide open again. And that's what this podcast is about. Wide Open is a place to step back and ask bigger questions and look for better ways to think and lead all throughout the state of Kansas. In this season, we're exploring one central question. How should cities be governed? Should they keep the council manager model, where a professional manager oversees city operations under the guidance of the council? Or move toward a strong mayor system, where executive power is centered in one elected leader, the mayor? At first, it might sound like a technical thing, or maybe even a boring thing. But I think it touches on deeper themes of vision, accountability, and how familiar structures are affected by the state of change in our communities today. I'm Evan Roselle from Sevenfold, and you're listening to Wide Open. As we heard in the last episode, prior to 100 years ago, most local governments were led by mayors who wielded incredible power. But as a result of things like the Industrial Revolution, immigration, and modernization, cities became denser, and in the wake of political corruption, communities increasingly desired more professional leadership and representation from their local government. Thus, for many communities, the era of the city manager was born. But if you're anything like me, you remember learning about the separation of powers as a kid in school, that our national and state governments have three branches: the executive, the legislative, and judicial. In many communities with a council manager model, that executive presence really isn't as clear, or it's split between the city manager and the mayor. What effect does this have? Is there something inherently different about local government that doesn't require an executive mayor? In this episode, we'll dive into the strong mayor model. What is it? What are the benefits or drawbacks? And what matters most as we ask those questions? Here's Dr. Russell Arbin Fox.
But if we're going to talk about leadership and their role in making a city into the kind of place that people can respect, that they can identify with, that they can have affection for, I think two things matter, possibly three. One is representation. People need to be able to say to themselves, this is my mayor. And you can say that about a mayor that you didn't vote for. You can say that about a mayor that you disagree with. Same thing with a governor, same thing with a president, same thing with any kind of executive figure. But if beyond the disagreement, you know that this is someone who is representing the city, someone who is standing up and saying, this is something that I have to offer the city. Is this something that you would endorse? And you know that even if you didn't endorse it, your next door neighbor did, or your uncle did. You know that there were a lot of people who did. And since you're a member of this city, you see that representative process playing itself out, and that's something that you can latch on to. You can latch onto it in a very positive way, in which you are celebrating, this person representing your interests. Or you can latch onto it, in a kind of a loyal opposition sort of way. Like, no, this is not good for our city, my city. I need to work with others to help them understand what's better for our city. Either way, that sense of connection is bound up with representation.
So real quick, I think there's something powerful in this idea that even when we disagree, representation somehow keeps us together. Whether you voted for the mayor or not, they still represent your city. And celebrating when things go right or pushing back when they don't actually strengthens your ownership in your city. Here's Dr. Fox with his second point.
The second thing would be accountability. Because if somebody says that they're going to represent you and they don't, you need to be able to hold them accountable for that. You need to be able to go and say, hey, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. I trusted you. You have violated that trust. Wichita gave you the opportunity to do this. You didn't do it. We as Wichita ought to be able to hold you accountable for that. Now here's where it's maybe 3 things instead of 2 things. Because there's something that's entwined with accountability, and that's power. You see, if the mayor says, oh, well, I had no power over that. These things just happen. There's nothing that I can do. Well, how can you hold that person accountable? The person that you want to represent you has got to have some kind of actual effective tools. How are you going to express your love for your city? I mean, you can express it artistically, you can express it in all sorts of different ways. But if you're going to express your love for your city in terms of politics and government and policy, then you've got to be able to say, this person represents an agenda I believe in. And you've got to be able to say, if that person doesn't move towards that agenda, I'm going to hold them accountable. And if structurally there was no way that they could move towards that agenda, there was no opportunity for them to actually do the thing that you as a representative wanted them to do, well, then there's never going to be any accountability, because they can always just say, oh, somebody else made that decision. It wasn't something I could do.
See, to Dr. Fox, this conversation is about something bigger than structure. He's saying that our governmental model actually supports or burdens the ideals and the notions of the community that we want to have. His central idea is this: when people feel represented, when they feel like they can hold elected leaders accountable, and that the elected leaders they're holding accountable actually have the power to do the things that voters elected them to do, it strengthens things. His argument is that the strong mayor form of government is actually more representative than the others.
Not representative in the sense that they're elected by the voters in a certain district, and they're going to take a look at the information presented by the city manager, and they're going to make decisions as to what they think will serve their constituents best. But no, a representative body in the sense that constituents are going to put people in office that will have specific agendas, things that they will aim to do. I'm talking about agenda in the sense of, we want the city to have these sorts of policies. We want the city to pursue these sorts of goals. They're going to hammer out policies, and they're going to interact with the mayor, who is in a position to veto those policies or pass those policies on as ordinances. And that means that that mayor is a true executive leader of the city. That mayor is going to cut deals with different members of the city council. That mayor is going to...
When you say cut deals, you mean finding coalitions around core policies. Yeah.
Exactly. They're going to, find majorities on the city council so that they can get the kind of ordinances set forward for them to enforce that they want to be able to enforce.
So what does this have to do with our central conversation? Is it just theory? Whether this is purely theoretical or whether it actually lends real support to the strong mayor model, well, that's up to you to decide. So let's zoom in for a moment, beyond the big ideas, and look at what a strong mayor system actually looks like in practice. We covered it briefly in the last episode, but it may be helpful to revisit it just a little bit. See, in this model, the mayor serves as the city's chief executive, while the council acts as the legislative branch. They debate policy, they pass ordinances, they approve budgets, and then the mayor carries those things out. Most strong mayor cities give the mayor veto power, though councils can often override that with a supermajority vote. Unlike the council manager form, where the authority rests in an appointed professional, a strong mayor structure vests that power in an elected official who oversees departments, prepares budgets, and hires or removes key staff. It's built around this idea of direct accountability. The mayor is chosen citywide and is held responsible for city operations. But it also brings a dose of state or national style politics too, where party lines and partisanship can begin to shape local leadership. I asked Dr. Fox about that.
the obvious question is, well, wait a minute, if you're talking about making deals and forming coalitions, then you're talking about party politics. And that is absolutely the case. There are a couple of nonpartisan examples of strong mayor systems, but overwhelmingly, if you have a strong mayor system, then that probably means that everybody on the city council ran as a Republican or a Democrat, meaning that there were primaries and all of the rest. And the mayor probably ran as a Republican or a Democrat. Because if you take seriously the idea that this kind of greater strength, that this kind of higher levels of direct representation is a good way to build a sense of identification with the city, well, then you've got to accept all of the other forms of identification that will come along with it. You're going to have voters that are going to want to have a Republican mayor. You're going to have voters that are going to want to have a Democratic mayor. And that carries forward into the conversation. My usual argument is that I think that stuff carries forward into the conversation all the time anyway. I think anybody with, the slightest bit of political knowledge can take a look at our current city council and they can say Republican, Republican, Democrat, Democrat.
Dr. Fox makes an interesting point here. At first blush, we might shy away from this idea of a partisan label. But at the end of the day, is it a helpful signpost or indicator for how someone generally views things? Does it actually create a more substantive connection with an elected leader?
I think the strong mayor system, among other advantages, is just plain more honest.
What other advantages do you see?
Greater representation. Choice is really, really essential for people to have any kind of trust in, any kind of identification with the representative process. So parties are by no means a perfect instrument of providing representation. But the fact that political parties have stuck around for such a very, very long time, and the fact that a lot of people appear to have developed really deep feelings of identification and place in the context of parties, suggests to me that if you allow that kind of party language to come in to elections, municipal elections, in a very direct and honest way, what you're likely doing is you're not hurting anybody's feeling of trust in or identification with the city. You're probably actually increasing it. And moreover, you're also on the ground allowing for more choices that will allow a greater range of people to feel possibly represented. Yeah, I think the strong mayor system, its strongest arguments are ones that have to deal with community bonds, with feelings of legitimacy, with representation. I think that's the strongest argument for it. It's not the only one, but it's the strongest argument for it.
There may be some folks listening to this who think that the last thing we need today is more partisanship in our governmental functions. And maybe you're right. But I'd encourage you to take a page out of Ted Lasso's book, The Fictional Soccer Coach from Kansas, when he says, "Be curious, not judgmental." Be curious about what Dr. Fox is saying. He's for a structure of government that increases community bonds, feelings of representation, and a shared identity, an honest expression of a community's direction. Whether the strong mayor structure is the only road to that reality, well, I can't make that call for you. This notion of increased power in one individual, the mayor, brings with it certain implications, some good, some risky. Remember our history lesson in the last episode about the origin of the city manager? It stemmed from several things, but perhaps the biggest driver was the citizens' frustration with cronyism and corruption. I stumbled upon a book cataloging the Wichita Rotary Club's engagement in Wichita over the years. They were very involved in the 1917 election to decide the structure of Wichita's city government. Their campaign materials contrasted two types of city managers: a campaign manager, who's an experienced politician driven to win elections, and a city manager, a businessman of experience and ability. The Rotary Club actually brought in a speaker, Dr. D.F. Garland, Superintendent of Public Welfare from Dayton, Ohio, who said that many of the country's city governments are, quote, the worst in Christendom, the most expensive, inefficient, and the most corrupt. And then he contrasted them with this, quote, harmonization of democracy and efficiency that would naturally stem from a city manager form of government. So is this cronyism issue somehow gone? Or do the risks that existed 100 years ago remain today? I asked Kathy Sexton and Dr. Fox about the risk of corruption in a strong mayor system today. Here's Kathy's take.
What you also have as I think, widely known as a very common risk for a strong mayor form is that typically they are more influenced by special interests. So it's the person that contributed to the campaign. It's the person that has the mayor's ear. It's those interest groups that are like, for example, in the city manager code of ethics, that's well regulated. But it's different when you're an elected official and you start listening. Well, who are you listening to? Are you making an effort to listen to all sides of the conversation, or are you getting one perspective? And as you know, as we talked about earlier, that's why the form evolved in so many communities, because they have elected officials going to jail because they were doing things wrong, so to speak.
And I asked a similar question to Dr. Fox. Do the concerns that existed 100 years ago with cronyism or the urban political machine still exist today? And would those be vulnerabilities of a strong mayor or mayor council form of government?
Yes. I don't understand that as being an argument against it. It's very odd to me that people thought. I mean, and again, I mean, it's not difficult to kind of wrap your head around, like we were saying before, 100 years ago, modernization, rationalization, all of these new disciplines that you could master. It suggested itself that we're going to get city experts here. But somehow nobody said, oh, that means that we need to replace Congress with a bunch of political scientists. Nobody said that. Why did we think that towns and cities could forego a really strong sense of representation in the name of expertise, but we didn't think states should? We didn't think the national government should. There's been corruption in Congress. It's mostly been addressed to the extent that it's been addressed through legislation. You could have cities do that. You create ordinances. You create campaign finance laws. You create rules about lobbyists.
There's been an argument made, that city managers are beholden to a set of ethics that apply to all city managers, which might not be the case in a strong mayor or mayor council form of government. What would be a response to that, other than the political accountability that would exist for?
I would simply have to go with the political accountability. I mean, you're right. Now, of course, just like there are doctors that violate their codes of ethics, there are city managers that violate their codes of ethics. But nonetheless, if you're hiring a professional city manager, if you're hiring someone with experience, then that presumably means that they have been socialized and they have been trained and they have committed themselves to doing their job in a particular way. And you can probably count on them continuing to do it in that particular way. When you're dealing with political leaders, when you're dealing with people that are running for an office that will allow them to wield real legislative and real executive power, you don't necessarily have that. What we have done on state and national levels is write our own codes of ethics. And, sometimes, certainly not consistently, certainly not always, but enforce those codes of ethics. And, legislators get reprimanded, and sometimes chief executives get impeached. You could argue, looking at the historical track record, that there's been a whole lot more of abuse in the absence of professionalized ethical codes than in the presence of them. And you may be right, but here is where I'll go way out on the limb, and I'll say, I think representation and accountability is important enough that a lot of people might choose to have less reliance on professionalized ethics if it means that they would have more direct choices in what kind of government their city's going to have.
Dr. Fox points out how the council manager model takes a different approach than we've applied to our states and even the country itself. He challenges the idea that those government models require different kinds of leadership. Dr. Fox isn't alone in his support for the strong mayor model. There are many other voices across the country who point out elements of that model that they see as preferable to the council manager structure. Indeed, many cities outside of Kansas have made the shift to a strong mayor model over the last several decades. Cities like Colorado Springs, Cincinnati, Oakland, Richmond, St. Petersburg, while others have rejected the option, like Austin, Texas. Most of the proponents echo Dr. Fox's support for the notions of clearer accountability and stronger leadership through articulation of vision and agenda. But there are other reasons too. Some argue that a strong mayor system results in a swifter, more agile, efficient decision-making process. For example, one writer suggests, quote, "A strong mayor system lets us actually try policies and see if they work. In the long run, better policies will eventually win out," end quote. Another reason often cited is that a strong mayor system allows for faster city responses to crises and emergencies. And others point to a strong mayor's visibility and authority to leverage economic development opportunities. And some say it's simply not politically fair for a mayor in a council manager form to be perceived by the public as having more authority to change things than he or she actually has. So, for proponents of a strong mayor model, it's not just a question of efficiency or expertise. It's a question of ownership. Who leads? Who decides? And who gets held accountable when something goes wrong? So far on this episode, we've largely heard arguments in support of a strong mayor model. But although the strong mayor system has many proponents, it also has many detractors too. Folks who think it inserts unnecessary risks and removes expertise from the complex issues that cities face today. Here's Kathy Sexton talking about the disempowering effect that a strong mayor model can have on other elected council members. What would be some of the risks or the downsides to a strong mayor?
Well, when you have a strong elected official running day-to-day things, it can be very disempowering for the other elected officials. So you are elected as a city council member, but you can't really do anything because the mayor's doing everything. And we don't get along, for example, so therefore I don't have any power to do much. That can be difficult for a lot of people in town who felt like, hold it, you're my representative, why can't you do anything? Well, because the mayor's in charge, that kind of thing. I think it's fair to say, too, that when a mayor's in charge, if they're a fabulous, magnanimous, intelligent, hardworking, healthy person, it can work great. But if you have a mayor who was in charge and then has a health problem and can't be in charge, well, who's in charge? What's going on? If you have a mayor who, doesn't really, loves people and loves the whole idea of, but isn't really much of a managerial sort of systems thinker, well, that's a risk. Mm-hmm. You don't always have that perfect person.
Kathy Sexton points out a common theme in criticisms of the strong mayor model, which is when it's great, it's great. But when it's bad, it can be really bad. It's really dependent on the leader and whether he or she wields the increased mayoral authority well. And whether they will or not, well, that's a risk. Dr. John Nalbandian takes a different angle. He says a community's desire to condense power in a visionary leader is something we should actually be wary of.
My strongest concern about strong mayor is the image that people have of a quote-unquote strong leader. And in my day, that would have been John Wayne. It would have been Superman. That image of a strong leader that you can rely upon is more an emotional expression of what we need rather than a logical expression. Now, are there not wonderful, strong mayors? Yeah, just like they're wonderful presidents. But we're talking about the long term here. You really can't afford a strong mayor who screws up the administrative apparatus. And you don't want a strong mayor who divides the council and says, if you vote for me, I'll do X, Y, and Z for your districts. Is that really the way you want it? Or do you want a form of government that is based on the combination of effectiveness, efficiency, and economy?
There are more critiques of the strong mayor form, but those are framed mostly as benefits for the council manager model. And don't worry, we'll hit those in the next episode. As this conversation unfolds, you'll see that one thing is clear. There are credible, thoughtful advocates on both sides of these issues. So how do cities across our country apply these arguments to their local contexts? How many communities actually use a strong mayor form of government? Well, according to Ballotpedia, of the top 100 cities in the United States, 47 of those use a strong mayor form of government, while 46 have a council manager form. And yes, I know that doesn't add up to 100. There's some hybrid, kind of wonky models out there. But what about smaller cities? What about Kansas? The sizes, budgets, and needs vary greatly across the municipal spectrum. But according to the Kansas League of Municipalities, the mayor-council form is used by nearly all the cities under a population of 2,000. That's over 500 cities. While the council-manager model is much more pronounced in larger cities. Cities like Manhattan, Wichita, Topeka, Colby, or Overland Park. And across the country, the data suggests somewhat of an inverted bell curve, with the largest and smallest cities trending toward strong mayor models, although for different reasons, while the middle-sized populations seem to favor a council-manager form. So what's our takeaway? I'd say whether you like the strong mayor model or not, with the majority of the largest cities in the country adopting it, not to mention the smallest cities as well, it's not really a question of feasibility. It's not something we can just dismiss out of hand on the theory that it simply won't work. Communities all across the country have a strong mayor form of government and have for many years. In our next episode, we'll dive into the council manager form of government. We'll see its strengths, its weaknesses, and how it directly compares to the strong mayor form. We'll see you next time on Wide Open.